everyone. Welcome to those who haven't been here before. Welcome back to those who have watched before. Thanks for coming again. My name is Leah Langley, and we're here to discuss the books I read in July 2025. I read 4 books this month, and let's just dive right in. So the first book I read was a book called How to Save Babylon, a memoir by Safia Sinclair, and it was excellent. Excellent. Let me give you a little synopsis on it. With echoes of Educated and Born a Crime, How to Save Babylon is a stunning story of an author's struggle to break free from her rigid Rastafarian upbringing, ruled by her father's strict patriarchal views and repressive control of her childhood, and her own voice as a woman and a poet. Throughout her childhood, Safia Sinclair's father is a volatile reggae musician and a militant adherent to a strict sect of Rastafari, became obsessed with her purity, in particular with the threat of what Rastas called Babylon, the immoral and corrupting influences of the Western world outside their home. He worried that womanhood would make Safia and her sisters morally weak and impure, and believed the woman's highest virtue was her obedience. In an effort to keep Babylon outside the gate, he forbade almost everything. In place of pants, the women in her family were made to wear long skirts and dresses to cover their arms and legs, head wraps to cover their hair, no makeup, no jewelry, no opinions, no friends. Safia's mother, while loyal to her father, nonetheless gave Safia and her siblings the gift of books, including poetry, to which Safia latched on for dear life. And as Safia watched her mother struggle voicelessly for years under housework and the rigidity of her father's beliefs, she increasingly used her education as a sharp tool with which to find her voice and break free. Inevitably, with her rebellion comes clashes with her father, whose rage and paranoia explodes in increasing violence as Safia's voice grows. Lyrically and politically, a collision course is set between them. How to Save Babylon is Sinclair's reckoning with the culture that initially nourished her, but ultimately sought to silence her. It is a reckoning with patriarchy and tradition and the legacy of colonialism in Jamaica. Rich in lyricism and language only a poet could evoke, How to Save Babylon is both the universal story of a woman finding her own power and a unique glimpse into a rarefied world. We may know the name Rastafari, but we know little about it. I cannot speak highly of this book enough. I gave it a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads, and it is just so breathtaking, kind of like it was kind of said in that little synopsis there. So lyrical, so honest, so courageous, so deeply moving. Sinclair tells her story of growing up in a Rastafarian household in Jamaica and finding her own voice through literature and self-expression. She writes so beautifully in this work, and it made sense as it's a coming of age story as we're kind of going through this period in her life and these years, that it's like, oh, it makes sense she's a poet, because from the very beginning of the book, it was like her words were so striking and so impactful, and just like I said, just really so beautiful. What makes the book extraordinary is Sinclair's ability to translate personal pain and cultural complexity to something universal. Obviously, like the Rastafari life, now a lot of people might not know about it. I certainly didn't. I have my father's side of the family is Jamaican, so I've known the term like Rastafari and things like that, but I kind of, as was said, I don't really know much about that, what's going on. But even with all that, the story is able to be universal in some sense, but also very still like deeply personal to her. Her prose is lush and powerful, capturing both beauty and brutality with precision. It's a hard read at times, but the story is about family, control, rebellion, and liberation, and Sinclair tells it with grace and fire of a poet. It's one of the most striking memoirs I've read in some time, and kind of was in that synopsis too. In many ways, it reminded me of this excellent book I read several years ago called Educated by Tara Westover. This is another coming-of-age novel where Tara grew up in like Utah or something like that. I'm trying to remember. I read this book in 2018 or 2019 in a family where her basically education and a whole bunch of other things like they weren't doing. And also Born a Crime, that was mentioned as well by Trevor Noah, another excellent book. I wish I actually owned that one. But it reminded me of Educated in particular by Tara Westover, How to Save Babylon did, because it's another like difficult read. Again, it's a coming of age story, woman at the center of it, and like harsh subject matter or whatever, but it's really worth your time, and I really could not recommend How to Save Babylon enough. Same for Educated and Born a Crime. If I have like little books of like books I recommend, like certain categories of books, memoirs, Educated and Born a Crime are both on that list, and How to Save Babylon actually might go on that list as well. Really great book. My first book for the year. I didn't even say this, but this was book 29 for the year, which is my goal for the year. Every year, a recap if you don't know, I read my age in books every year. So it's kind of like a lower goal for me. I usually always pass it around the midpoint of the year, but that was my official 2025 goal done. Book 29 for the year. First book for the month of July, and a really great way to start July. Excellent book. Excellent book. All right, next up we have book 2 of July 2025. Book 30 for the year is Revenge of the Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Overstory, super spreaders, and the rise of social engineering. Synopsis on it first. 25 years after the publication of his groundbreaking first book, The Tipping Point. My light is kind of killing it here. The Tipping Point. Malcolm Gladwell returns with the brand new volume that reframes the lesson of the tipping point in a startling and revealing light. Why is Miami Miami? Why does the heartbreak fate of a cheetah tell us about the way we raise our children? Why do Ivy League schools care so much about sports? What is the magic third? And what does it mean for racial harmony? In this provocative new work, Malcolm Gladwell returns for the first time in 25 years to the subject of social epidemics and tipping points, this time with the aim of explaining the dark side of contagious phenomena. Through a series of riveting stories, Gladwell traces the rise of a new and troubling form of social engineering. He takes us to the streets of Los Angeles to meet the world's most successful bank robbers. We discovers a forgotten television show from the 1970s that changed the world, visits the site of historic experiment on a tiny cul-de-sac in Northern California, and offers an alternative history to two of the biggest epidemics in our day, COVID and the opioid crisis. Revenge of the Tipping Point is Gladwell's most personal book yet. With this characteristic mix of storytelling and social science, he offers a guide to making sense of the contagions of the modern world. It's time we took tipping points seriously. So this book, Malcolm Gladwell is an author. Tipping Point is his seminal work, and it's an excellent read. If you haven't read Tipping Point, you really, really should read it. And I've read several of the books of his that I thought had been excellent. I really, truly enjoyed. So obviously when I heard about Revenge of the Tipping Point, I was like, oh, great. We have a new book from Gladwell. He's going back to something Tipping Point. Obviously, like I said, The Tipping Point was a great book. So I was excited to read The Revenge of the Tipping Point. And I saw someone say this. Revenge of the Tipping Point attempts to build on the ideas of The Tipping Point, but ultimately feels more like a forced sequel than a meaningful evolution of the concept. I gave this book a 2 out of 5 out of 5, which I believe is, of all the Gladwell books I've read, is the lowest rating I've ever given a book of his. He's an excellent writer, and as I said, I've read several of his books and I've enjoyed them, but I don't feel like this book had like a clear message, and it felt mostly disjointed. I don't know, it was, as I was going along with it, I kept kind of waiting for something to like really kind of like weave it together, or some kind of things, like some of the more insight to maybe come that I usually expect from him, but I just was never there. And at a certain point, I was kind of just like, I also was against the clock reading this book because I got this book from, I didn't realize my sister had this copy of this book until after I read it, but I was going up against trying to finish it before they took it away from the library for me. I actually was on a trip trying to finish it. So there was that as well, but I was really at the point too of just like, I want to just be done with the book. It just was not, it is, like I said, it didn't feel like there was a clear message. It kind of felt disjointed. That was kind of what was going on, and I don't know. Maybe I'll flip through some of the pages later. I'm not sure, but that is how I was feeling about the Revenge of the Tipping Point. Disappointing, because again, I've read some other of Gladwell's work, and it's been excellent. So, but hey, that was book 2 of July 2025. Next book is a book called A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis. Some synopsis here. Written with love, humility, and faith, it's a brief but poignant volume that was first published in 1961 and concerns the death of C.S. Lewis's wife. Written in longhand and notebooks that Lewis found in his home, A Grief Observed probes the mad midnight moments of Lewis's mourning and loss, moments in which he questioned what he had previously believed about life and death, marriage, and even God. Indecision and self-pity assailed Lewis. We are under the harrow and can't escape, he writes. I knew that the thing, another quote here, I knew that the thing I want is exactly the thing I could never get. The old life, the jokes, the drinks, the arguments, the lovemaking, the tiny, heartbreaking commonplace. Writing A Grief Observed as a defense against total collapse, a safety valve, he came to recognize that bereavement is a universal and integral part of our experience of love. Lewis writes his statement of faith with precision, humor, and grace, yet neither is Lewis reluctant to confess his continuing doubts and his awareness of his own human frailty. This is precisely the quality which suggests that A Grief Observed may become among the great devotional books of our age. Grief is something that we all all have gone through, all will go through. Before I go on further, let me read this quote from the book. And grief still feels like fear, perhaps more strictly like suspense, or like waiting, just hanging about, waiting for something to happen. It gives life the permanently provisional feeling. It doesn't seem worth starting anything. I can't settle down. I yawn. I fidget. I smoke too much. Up till this, I had always too little time. Now there is nothing but time. Almost pure time. Empty successiveness. As I said, grief is something that everyone will go through, and if you haven't gone through, you will, unfortunately. And it can feel very, very lonely, very isolating. It's devastating. It feels so heavy, and people try to comfort you, and it's like you don't want to hear it. And again, you're kind of stuck in this like lonely place, no matter how many people are trying to like be there for you. But C.S. Lewis in Grief Observed writes in a way that makes you feel you're not alone in it, and like makes you remember like this is something that we all go through. And obviously he's writing about grief and loss after the loss of his wife. I gave this book a 3 out of 5 on Goodreads. I don't know. It's. Let me before I even say a little bit more on that, let me read something from the introduction. This version I have was like a newer, updated version. And the introduction came from Madeline Lingle. Her introduction said, "I'm grateful to Lewis for having the courage to yell, to doubt, to kick at God in angry violence. This is part of a healthy grief, which is not often encouraged. It is helpful indeed that C.S. Lewis, who has been such a successful apologist for Christianity, should have the courage to admit doubt about what he has so superbly proclaimed. It gives us permission to admit our own doubts, our own angers and anguishes, and to know that they are part of the soul's growth." I did appreciate that from Lewis. I haven't read any books of his, I don't believe. I don't think I ever have read any books of his, but I've certainly had that myself when I've gone through griefful like moments in my life where I've been like just completely succumbed by grief, like blaming God or pointing fingers and trying to like having all these questions about like why this, why that, why this way, and he's exploring that as he's going through this process of grief. And as is said in that introduction thing, I think it is a healthy and an honest way to like look at grief. We can't just, I think in general, grief is something that people kind of like they push to the corner. They don't really talk about very much because it's like but it's something that's so universal. It's like it should be spoken about more. This is like a kind of a tangent here, but Anderson Cooper has a podcast that's like all about grief, and he like interviews people talking about grief that they've had in their life, and he's gone through a lot of grief in his own personal life with his family and things like that. And that's one of those things where there needs to be more conversations on that, because it's people are walking around every day like, and we all have similar experiences in terms of like heaviness. Thinking about this book in terms of like books on grief, things like that, I want to talk about quickly 2 books that I've read about grief as well, talk about it. Obviously I've read more, but these just came to mind. Notes on Grief by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I read this book, I think maybe in 2021. If not, I'll correct it somewhere on the screen here. And I read it at a time where I absolutely needed it. And I didn't want to keep going because I honestly could tear up thinking about this book. I read it at a time I absolutely needed it. It's a very short book, as you see. And Chimamanda is an excellent writer. I read several of her books. And this is a great one. If you need this, or someone you might know need this, I would recommend this one. And this one is a book that author we're gonna talk about in the next book I read for this month. Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking. Another one I read at a time where I really needed it. And yeah. So A Grief Observed was great by C.S. Lewis. Well, pretty good by C.S. Like I said, I gave it a 3 out of 5. I could have given it more, but Joan Didion, Year of Magical Thinking, Notes on Grief, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And there's lots of other books out there that cover this topic as well. And just in general, I think we need to have more conversations about grief and things, because it's, like I said, it's a very universal thing. And like I said, it does feel very lonely, but you have to kind of remember at times, as hard as it is, that you're not alone in it. Okay. And my final book for July 2025, this is book 4 for July, book 32 for the year, is Slouching Towards Bethlehem by Joan Didion. As I just mentioned in that last thing, I've read A Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. I've read several other works of hers. I think I've read at least another 2 books of hers, not including Slouching Towards Bethlehem. And I was happy to finally read another one of her seminal works. Little synopsis here. the first nonfiction work by one of the most distinctive prose stylists of our era, Joan Didion's Slouching towards Bethlehem, remains, decades after its first publication, the essential portrait of America, particularly California in the 60s. I'm particularly California because my family's Californian, so whoop whoop. It focuses on subjects as John Wayne and Howard Hughes growing up a girl in California, ruminating in the nature of good and evil in the Death Valley motel room, and especially the essence of San Francisco's Ashbury, the heart of the counterculture. It contains Didion's famous essay, Goodbye to All That. Yes, it does. It's a thoughtful, incisive, this is me now, a thoughtful, incisive collection that captures a turbulent moment in American history. We're in the 60s, like I said, primarily in California, captures it with such clarity and depth. And Didion's writing, as in all her work, I really feel like it's very sharp, personal, and deeply observant. This is a collection of essays, if I didn't mention already. I found this book very insightful and timeless, and it's easy to see why it was so popular and so impactful when it was published then, and also why it continues to resonate today. And everything of Didion's I've read, I've enjoyed, and like I said, I was happy to read another one of her seminal work. So this was a nice way to end the year. I finished this July 31st, at 11 p.m. at night or something like that. Like I said, a collection of essays, an excellent work, and adding it to the Joan Didion repertoire. I gave this a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads. Very good read. Yeah, that is kind of it. Quick and easy, hopefully. The 4 books I read in July 2025. Yeah, as always, find me on Goodreads, Adalia Langley. I'll put it on the screen here. I'll link it below for you to look at my the books I've read. If you want to look at my specific reviews for them or my highlights, some of the books I had this year, this month, like for example, Slouching towards Bethlehem, I had on Apple Books, so I didn't have the Kindle connection to do the highlights, whatever. But on Goodreads, you can see my highlights, my notes on other things like that, and what I'm reading. If you don't want to wait every month for these books, you can always look there and check those out early. All the good things. As always, send me recommendations for books. We're in August now. I have the first book I'm going to read this August. I just got it through my Libby account, so I'm going to probably I'm going on a flight tomorrow, so I'm probably going to, or I guess technically, because I'm filming this just past midnight, whatever, I'm going to probably read that one here soon. Yeah, send me recommendations. I'm always needing them. Thank you guys so much for listening, watching, doing the whole thing. Let me know if you've read any of these books that I spoke about today. Any thoughts on them, or any of the other books I kind of mentioned about that reminded me about any of these books I read. All the good things. But we'll see you guys for the next book video here soon. All right, bye-bye.